Hey everybody, welcome to ESO vlog number 2. Today we are going to talk about everything that we know so far. However, we got a surprise. Today as I sat down to film this video, the email showed up for the next ESO beta schedule this weekend. So I'm guessing we know what next week's video is going to be about. So before we dive into what we know is in the game, let's talk about what we know is definitely not going to be in the game, or at least at launch. Dragons, player housing, spears, and crossbows have all been ruled out. There is a good chance any or all of that may be added down the line, however, dragons certainly would be lore difficult. So exactly what is in the game? Well, that'll cost you $60 and an ongoing $15 subscription fee to find out. I do actually prefer the subscription model. I think that helps keep out riffraff and spammers. However, the game as it is right now, I just don't know if 30 days in people are going to be willing to reach into their pockets for another 15 bucks. And maybe you're just going to call this a write-off, particularly console players who aren't generally used to paying a subscription fee. Now, if I'm going to be paying a premium price, I expect to be playing a premium game. And the very first thing I look at to see whether or not a game is trying to run with the big boys is whether or not it's fully voice acted. I think Star Wars set that standard, and we have no reason to go backwards. Good news is Elder Scrolls is fully voice acted, and like some of the other Elder Scrolls titles, they went out and spent some money on some quality recognizable talent to do some of the main storyline voiceovers. Another positive note, Lua support for mods will also be in the game. Considering the overwhelming criticism the user interface received from PC players, I think this was a no-brainer. In fact, I'll go so far as to say mods may make or break this game for the PC community, particularly if ZeniMax is smart and does what Blizzard did and use mods to recognize shortcomings in their game. The last two miscellaneous items involve travel. Ground mounts will be in the game, as will fast travel. Fast travel is going to work exactly like it works in Guild Wars 2. You find a waypoint and then can travel to that waypoint at will. You will also be able to be summoned by your party companions. However, the summoning will not take place on the spot. You will actually travel to the nearest safe waypoint. Now, as far as gameplay goes, Elder Scrolls Online is a rather blatant Guild Wars 2 clone, and a pretty mediocre one at that. Possibly the most ridiculous aspect of this game is the 6-button system. I'm going to go ahead and pause some of this gameplay footage, and if you look at the bottom here, you will see your 6 available combat actions. Now, people like to spend a lot of time telling you how dumbed down World of Warcraft is. When I raid or instance in Warcraft, regardless of class, I have a minimum of 24 buttons hotkeyed. I have a Razor Naga, 12 buttons on the thumb, all shift modifiers, 24 buttons. When I arena, I add some targeting and more complicated macros with control modifiers, knocks that number well over 30. 30 buttons. Elder Scrolls Online has 6 buttons. I hate to just throw the console players under the bus, but this design had to be because of the limitations of a console controller. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, in my mind, I believe Elder Scrolls Online is the first big-budget fantasy MMO developed specifically for the console with the PC player as an afterthought. And unfortunately for us PC gamers, or more specifically us PC MMOers, it makes a lot of business sense to cater to the next-gen console player. Why would you want to base your success or failure on competing in the ridiculously oversaturated PC MMO market right now when you can just walk in unchallenged into the next-gen console market? As of right now, I think, what is there? There's like 7 million total Xbox and PlayStation 4s sold. By the April when this game comes out, that number will probably be at 10 million. Now, I know that's a small number when compared to the PC market. Remember this, though. Almost every console at launch only has a few limited titles that people burn through, and the big name titles, Battlefield and Call of Duty, have already shot their wad until next Christmas. There is every chance Elder Scrolls could walk in and grab several 100,000 subscribers by middle of 2014 just on the console. Think that through, guys. That means that on consoles alone, within maybe a year, Elder Scrolls Online could have as many subscribers as either Star Wars or Rift does in total. And they're going to get some freebies just from the Elder Scrolls license on the PC anyway. Anyway, food for thought. So, what are these 6 buttons and how do they work? Well, in the words of legendary crooner Gomer Pyle, surprise, 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 they work exactly like they do in Guild Wars 2, just on a smaller scale. The first two buttons will definitely be tied to weapon and armor skills, and will also be hot swappable. However, I don't remember off the top of my head how many presets you can have. I'll tell you what, I'll find that out in the beta, and I'll make sure I cover that on this week's beta review. Okay, we're going to skip over the next three and go over to button number 6, which appears to be reserved for your class ultimate ability. The ultimate abilities look cool, and they actually are cool, but everybody playing that class is going to have the same ability, so not a whole lot of diversity there. Now that leaves us the middle three buttons for the entirety of the rest of the game. For some contextual reference here, keep in mind there's going to be a Fighters Guild, a Mages Guild, and a Thieves Guild, all with their own abilities. There's also going to be racial abilities. And then, of course, all of the general abilities you pick up as you level up skills and morph abilities throughout the game, all of which have to fit into 3 button slots. Now, the positive to that is that every time you meet a player, even if his play style wants to match somebody else, he's probably going to have to be running a different rig or setup because he just doesn't have the button slots available. The downside of this, of course, is even really without min-maxing, they are going to render so many of the game's capabilities as utterly pointless. All right, so let's go ahead and now move on to progression. It has been confirmed, in Endgame at least, that you will not be able to move as freely throughout the zone as what you otherwise might think. We know, for instance, that you are going to be required to unlock the capability to travel into an opposing faction zone. I don't know if there's also going to be artificial barriers within Cyrodiil itself. We can hope that these barriers and unlocking quests aren't too common in the lower and mid-level zones, because that really just kind of defeats the whole purpose of an Elder Scrolls game, not being able to just wander off into the horizon. Speaking of wandering off, at launch there will be 16 instances, which actually sounds like a fairly impressive number, but please keep in mind that many of these instances are going to be placed in faction zones that you simply cannot get to. What's worse is these instances are actually going to level up with you, which was the worst part about Oblivion. Yes, it was done with some subtlety and nuance in Skyrim, so it wasn't obtrusive, but I just don't see the point of going out and getting new spells and armor and sweet epic weapons just so the goblin I killed 5 minutes ago has scaled up with me. I hated being de-leveled in Guild Wars 2, and this is basically that process in reverse. One of my favorite things about Warcraft was running old content that I could do solo and seeing a lot of things I'd never seen before, hearing character dialogue and instances, seeing little areas that weren't what you couldn't get a group to pull, things like that that just really add a little bit of flavor to the game while you're waiting for some buddies to log on. Just not gonna happen here, apparently. On the bright side, though, apparently when you do reach cap level and you run these instances on heroic mode, there will be a completely different storyline, which is kind of sweet. Now, to add a little layer of dynamism to this content, though, the developers have been really talking about this whole group AI and mobs working in tandem. This, of course, has been tried before in games like EverQuest 2, but really, in my mind, it wasn't very successful. It always felt forced and scripted. But if ESO pulls it off, then there's a lot of replay value to the instances themselves. Now, running these instances is probably the biggest departure from the overwhelming Guild Wars 2 influence on this game. 4-man groups with the return of the Holy Trinity. Yay! Now, of course, when I say a return to the Holy Trinity, people are automatically going to assume, oh, okay, World of Warcraft. That's just not how it is. Targetable heals in this game are going to be somewhat scarce, so everyone's going to have to stay on their toes and manage their damage intake individually, including the tank. Couple of final thoughts on the dungeons. There will be a group finder. All loot will be on an individual basis, so you won't have to compete for the loot. And there will be some non-instance solo, or what they call 1.5 dungeons, designed to be run by yourself or with one friend. However, as they are an instance, these are going to be trample fests with 40 people standing around waiting for the boss to spawn. Probably going to be more of an embarrassment than anything else. Most, if not all, of the endgame content is actually going to be in the disputed area of Cyrodiil. And you know what? That actually might create some awesome opportunities for some unplanned Alliance versus Alliance small group PvP. I'm really looking forward to that. Last but not least is crafting. I've always enjoyed this regardless of whatever game I've been playing. There are 5 confirmed professions: alchemy, weaponsmith, armorsmith, enchanting, and provisioner. Apparently, provisioner is a cook. ZeniMax is taking every opportunity to say that they want to keep crafting professions relevant at the end game. Now, that does not mean that crafted gear is going to be the best gear in the game. It would be very easy, however, to have gear be modified by the various professions and have a provisioner maybe whip up food as a raid buff, something along those lines. I personally have yet to be able to find out how many professions each player will be able to engage in, and I think there's a missed opportunity here. There should have been a leather worker for medium armor, a tailor for light armor. Having just a few more professions and limiting the number of professions each individual player could have taken could probably have guaranteed you a more immersive, interdependent economy that I think a lot of people would have enjoyed. And in a nutshell, that is all the important information we know about the game so far, at least in my opinion. Next week's video is going to be a review of the January 10th beta.